Hey everyone, it's the host of All Across America, Marco Vig, jumping in for a few seconds before the show to thank y'all for listening, to let you know that I want to hear from you. Tell me what you like about the show, and send me your suggestions too. Follow us on Instagram at AllXAmerica, or visit the website, allacrossamerica.net, and you can use our contact page there. If you want to support us, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/allacrossamerica. Try to respond personally to everyone who reaches out, so say hello. All right, on with the show. Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America. I want to start with Sermons in Stone because it's the most timeless of all subjects. So I have the book here in front of me.
Okay,
Stone Walls
great.
in New England and New York, and I got what do we call this? Ephemera. The Norton Book News from immediate release from, when was this? Do you recognize this? 1990?
That's when it was published, 1990.
Yeah, that was the original one. This is the first edition.
You mean it came
Yes,
inside of that?
Yeah, that was in the book.
Okay.
And then I have another article, Stone Symbols of Shaker Permanence, Visiting Canterbury's Fine Walls. And this was in New Hampshire, so this was an article.
That was in the book as well?
That was in the book, yeah. I picked this up online.
How interesting.
Yeah.
That article there was how the New York Times travel section contacted me and wanted me to do that article. Wait a second.
Somewhere southern New Hampshire.
Okay. And from there, I became a regular travel writer for them. And it was so fun. So then any trip that our family took, I would write it up for the Times travel section. And it was great. And it's hard to get into the travel section, but once they've accepted you, then, then they accept your articles. But that was the first one that they had asked me to go and do.
That's great. So that was the very first. Wow, okay. So you've written about stone walls. You've written about natural history of parenting. Your most recent is about omega-3s. And I was trying to get a theme to tie them all together. And there didn't seem to be one, except maybe it's just stuff you're interested in.
It's stuff I'm interested in. It used to be stuff that was around me because the stone walls, we lived in Katona, New York, and our property was just divided and subdivided by wall.
Right.
So it was, what are these walls doing here?
Yeah.
And then the best part about living in Katona was that Bedford is accessible, all of Bedford accessible through these riding trails, the BRLA.
Okay.
And so I could see that what was on my property, the walls on my property, were replicated on property after property.
Okay.
And that made it feel like, there's some story here, there's some pattern here that I wouldn't have known just from looking at the walls on the road, for instance, or the walls certainly on just my property.
Right.
So that was an amazing thing, that because we used the riding trails just for walking, and then we could see that there was this pattern throughout the town. So that was
and it says for some misconceptions that I think you had talked about, there forests grew around. People think that stone walls have been there for it, but the forests have grown up around these walls, and these were fields
and
originally.
this is second growth, right. This
if
is
not
all
third growth.
If not third growth, right. So originally, when the first colonists came here, when they were confronted with, just incredible first growth timber that they had to clear, and they thought it was going to last them forever. They used it very poorly because they thought it would always be around, and it wasn't. By the time of the American Revolution, most settlements were experiencing lumber shortages.
Right. I've read that there's more trees now than there were 150 years ago.
Right, because it was all cleared.
Right.
Yes,
right.
It was all cleared at that point, and people were burning they had to turn out that they were burning fences during the Revolution because they were so short on lumber.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that brings me, and one of the things that I didn't realize is that, and it makes sense, is that the stone walls were not the first walls that were built, to hem in cattle or, animals, whatever it may have been, that it was, you're clearing the land, it would have been trees, it would have been stumps.
The stumps
were the most
great.
Attractive of walls.
Right. So those would have been so messy looking. So it would have been stump, and then you would have put all your, brushes on top of that stump, whatever worked. Because what happened was when the first settlers came here, they came from a land where there was a lot of excess labor to a land where they had no extra labor. There were nobody to do the herding and the shepherding that they had been used to. And they had immediate need to protect their animals, to keep their animals in line. And they had to separate their crops, which they were raising, from the animals that they brought in. So they didn't really appreciate that the Native Americans had not had to do that because they didn't keep domesticated animals. So the Native Americans had no need for fencing. The colonists came in and they thought, oh, we're better than them because we're going to put up fencing. But it was a totally different system of agriculture, that the Native Americans had no need for it. And now that the colonists were there, they brought in all their domesticated animals, which were getting into the Native American plots. And so there were all this conflict, all this friction between the two groups, and a real lack of appreciation on the part of the colonists.
It takes a lot of calorie expenditure to build stone walls.
Well, that too. But they just, that they weren't better than them because they were intending to build walls, that it was a very different way of living. You were,
And probably trying to take customs from England, from the old country.
Yes, they were taking it from the old country and applying it on this country, and it took a long time to sort itself out.
It's and the other thing that I realized is that the stone walls were not they cleared a plot to build a home, but the stone walls really weren't built until they did agriculture on those plots. And as we talked about, stumps were first. And once you're digging to till the ground, that's when you're getting the stone walls.
You're pulling out the stones then. They were kept in heaps. As soon as you started to plant, the stones would be coming to the surface, because that's, this part of the world is just littered with stone.
Tell me about it.
Right. So as soon as you started to dig, the stones would be coming to the surface. The first thing you did with them was put them in a pile somewhere. And it wasn't until you ran out of other fencing options that you then turned to those stones to actually build a stone wall. In some parts of New England, there were larger enslaved people populations, and they might have turned to stone wall building earlier. For instance, in Rhode Island, I know that they turned to building stone walls much earlier than the rest of New England. Or if a farmer happened to have a lot of hardy, healthy sons that could help him turn to stone wall
Put
building
their energy
early.
to good use.
So it's a little bit varied in that way, but in general, it wasn't until after the Revolution that serious stone wall building started.
I think we were saying 1775 to 1825 was the stone wall period.
Right.
And I have a barn in the back of my house, and the grass stopped about 10 feet from the barn. I was like, that's silly. Why not make a nice plot of grass? So I began kind of digging up, which was a forested area, and I realized very quickly why they stopped, and there were just these giant boulders, just a row of just giant boulders in the ground, and I would pull one up, and then there would be another, and then there would be another. So I really learned about the Connecticut soil.
But had they been put there? Were you digging up the remnants
it's a possibility.
of something?
I mean, it's a possibility because there was a fence that had extended in the other direction. So that's a possibility that might have been the foundation.
Oh, or some foundation. That's what it sounds like.
So, but I do worry in reading your book and how a lot of folks did it, particularly the wet versus the dry stone walls. I'm building a stone wall. I've got stone walls flanking both sides of my property. It's the original homestead, which the road was named after. So I spent a lot of time just putting rocks back into place as gravity's kind of knocked them over.
Which is a great thing to do.
I'm building like a retaining wall. I think I have a picture I want to show you real quick so you get a visual of, and I'll have to put this, let's see if I can find it here. I just took it this morning. There we go.
Oh, look at that.
So,
and
but
what's that? Yeah.
That's supposed to be like a fire area in back. So I built that all by hand. With my 4-year-old has helped a little bit, but I had read up in your book and the Granite Kiss as well, which is kind of the more technique than history based about laying a foundation. And a lot of folks today dig a foundation and they put gravel on the bottom. Others back in the day was just stone. So I didn't lay a foundation. It was just way, way too much work at this point. But what I did do was put big rocks on the bottom. So,
which is a great foundation.
Yeah, so I'm hoping. Thank you for playing the role of part psychologist.
Right.
Because
because most people don't have those big rocks.
Yeah, and that's what I have. And they're actually the stones come from the property. So every single stone I've taken from the property, and so that's been my ongoing project for 6 or so months now, and. I think you wrote it's a 3-dimensional puzzle.
Yes.
So
Not something that my brain gravitates towards. I've done a stone wall building class.
Okay.
There's the Stone Trust in Vermont. Have
Really?
you ever heard about it?
No.
They've taken techniques from England and are applying it or bringing them to this country. And so you can go through these levels of stone wall building till you're a master builder up there.
Really?
And it's really interesting, very exhausting. So they asked me to come up and give a talk up there.
Okay.
And I said, "Oh, that's fun. Why don't we swap instead of you giving me payment? I enroll in one of your classes because they're not cheap."
Right.
So they said, "Sure, that sounds great." So I enrolled in the class, and we arrive on site, and there's a 4-foot stone wall there. And they said, "Okay, your first task now as students is to take it down, and then after lunch we'll rebuild it."
Oh, God.
By the time that night came and I was due to give this class,
oh goodness,
I was so exhausted that...
Should have done it the other way around.
I should have done it. And most of my fellow students didn't even show up for the talk at all. They were just in bed. They were just in bed. I won't ever do that again.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. And where is this located?
It's in it's near Brattleboro.
Okay, so
I've forgotten the name,
okay.
but it's it's great. The Stone Trust is what it's called. It's really an interesting place. You go up, they have many stone walls on the property, and you can see all these different examples.
Right.
And it's fascinating. It's fun.
I don't know if you've been to Weir Farm in Wilton, Connecticut, the National Historic. It's a National Historic Site. Not a national park, but a national historic. And I keep
meaning to do this.
There was an artist, and I'm forgetting the name of the artist that was based there. I was clearly more interested in the stone walls, and they've have a brochure about stone walls, which is the first I've ever seen anywhere. And they've got thrown walls, laid walls, and then the rubble-filled walls, which I'm having trouble saying.
Yeah. Wow, I've got to get over there. Okay. I'm going to make that a priority. Write that down. Get over.
I'm going to move that just a little bit closer, just to make sure that we're getting good.
Are we?
Let's do check, and just do a quick check.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll edit that up. I'm so concerned. You never know, and I always try and check in because I don't have a backup, and God forbid something happens.
Right.
The Weir Farm. The stone wall that I've done, and the three are the thrown wall, which is kind of the basic stone wall you see anywhere where they throw the stones.
Yeah.
Then the laid wall was more laid and parceled out and nice. And the rubble filled wall is also a nice wall, but it's considered a vast improvement on the laid wall in that there is rubble in the middle. And the theory behind that, I guess, is that as the ground shifts, these are all dry stone walls, which I should say for folks that don't know, that wet is cement, dry is no cement. And the wall I'm building, the walls that I have in the house are all dry, and they allow, apparently, according to reading from you, that's the better way, or it's the more longevity you'll get from a dry wall versus the
right.
the cement.
Well, any little bit of water that gets into the cement wall will, in the winter, freeze, expand, and start forcing that wall apart.
Yeah.
So a wet wall has to have a very deep foundation in order to survive, and it has to be done so well.
Right.
You see. If you just drive around the roads around here, you will see wet walls in various states of disrepair. They were supposed to solve the problem of frost heaves and the fact that frost does play havoc on our
potholes to stone walls.
It does its thing on stone walls. But the wet wall is so much harder to repair if it has trouble, which most of them in the end will do. They'll start to crack and fall apart.
And we've got a wet wall in the front of our property that was built much later on, and almost as a retaining wall. And I meant to ask you, we have, and it's very unique, I would say, to southern Connecticut, and we're in the very western part of Connecticut. We're probably one of the first ones in New England. We have the stone wall, and there is a fence on top of the stone wall. And you don't see that very often.
No, that's because the fence is decayed on most, used to be more common. Especially in places where stone wasn't as common as it is in other places.
I see.
That you would have those stakes and riders on top of a fence.
I see.
And that's why, nowadays you see these low walls and people say, well, those couldn't have been agricultural in nature. They're much too low. But that whole fencing part was on top and has long since rotted.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was more trellis shaped as opposed to today. It's like I've got what looks like a white picket fence on top of it.
No, it would have been stakes and riders on top of that.
But that comes from that tradition then, where they had the lower stone walls, and because they just didn't have the rock that they wanted
to build up to the level that they needed for animals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they really do rot because I've had to repair the fence on top, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
but it's really
and the
nice.
stakes would be on the ground on either side,
kind of like an A-frame,
an A-frame, exactly.
Okay,
right. Oh, so you see some of those. Those are very unusual to see.
Yeah, they're not very many, and I guess that stone walls in the title of your book is Sermons and Stone Walls in New York and New England, and there really aren't stone walls in, let's say, the South, and they really do start in New Jersey. Can you tell us?
In New Jersey, well, I haven't traveled down to Pennsylvania and Kentucky. Those are different kinds of walls.
Okay.
But basically, we have the stone walls here that were from the stones deposited by the glaciers.
Okay.
So however far those came down,
Gotcha.
we have all that extra stone that was there to be used as a fencing material.
Wow.
Basically.
All right.
Yeah.
And there are more stone walls in southern New England than there are in northern New England, if I read correctly, because there was just less agriculture up there.
Right. And so we went through the transition where you had that big wave of stone wall building, the 1820s, and then it was followed quickly by the opening of the West so that farmers could move to better lands in the West, and the innovations of horse and steam-powered machinery, which required bigger fields, not these small walled fields that the farmers had so laboriously created.
Right.
And all of a sudden, here's this new kind of equipment which, promised, huge time-saving methods, but they couldn't use them until they had taken their walls down.
Interesting. Okay.
So instead of taking their walls down, I mean, this was part of a farmer's calculation. Do I take my walls down and use this equipment on this land, which was never so great to begin with?
Right.
Or do I move west and start over?
I see. Okay.
And that was, a lot of them made that decision
to
move west. And that's why we see the walls in the woods.
Right.
Because the land was abandoned at the same time that shift in agricultural equipment was taking place, and that the lands were being opened in the west.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so permanent. I mean, it is the most permanent of things. That, that
Yeah.
stone wall that I'm building will outlast me. I may live to be 100, and I hope I do, but it will still outlast me because what do you do with the stones? And I mean, you did talk about in some places people they just dug a trench next to the stone wall and pushed the stones
and buried the stone walls. Right.
Which sounds easier to just move to the Midwest.
Yeah, but on land that was good, people made that investment buried them.
Yeah.
On land that was poor, that wouldn't have been a very good calculation.
Right. Okay. Right. And so it was just that's a big calculation to make, but it makes a lot of sense. So I mean, so stone walls helped
move people west.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Once you're right, and they had been so. Such a good sign of a good farming. The stone wall, a beautifully laid stone wall, was just, indicative of good farming techniques. And then it shifted so quickly to, oh my gosh, these walls are strangling us.
Right.
Yeah.
And then left for the trees to go around.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
And then we've got moving. I think the last chapter of your book, which I really like, and which is a lot closer to what, of course, things are today, is the walls of affluence. And here we are in Westchester County and very close to Fairfield County and the estates of Greenwich and. That are very well known for its stone walls.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
I think the walls in Greenwich are fun because they are such affluence, and you see that there's one, and they're very unusual. They're very distinctive walls down there. They're not all the same.
Right.
And some of them are very imaginative.
Yeah.
The ones that are just now. Being done without any sense of imagination or material are boring.
Yeah.
But the old ones that were built in the 20s, 30s, I imagine, can be really interesting.
Oh yeah, they are. I mean, they're big. I mean, some of them are 6+ feet.
Yeah, very impressive. Very.
And it's quite. I mean, obviously, it's an art, but it's also you can make quite a bit of money building those stone walls. And I knew a family when I grew up whose family were masons and had done a lot of the big estates, and the son was it a I mean, I think it was a Lamborghini he was driving. They get X amount of dollars per square foot, and
more these days.
Yes,
then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Just the culture of people who immigrated to the United States into at least this area, in particular Westchester County. It was initially the Irish Americans who were the Masons, and then when building the Croton Dam, many of their laborers were Italian Americans, particularly from southern Italy. And nowadays the bosses are the Italians, and the laborers are Guatemalan and other folks from Central America. And it's interesting to see the progression of immigration,
and that's reflected in the kind of walls that people are building too, because people build the walls of their childhood,
right.
And a lot of them, these builders had nice flat stones that they were building back in their native countries, and they're trying to replicate that here, but we're more used to a much rougher stone,
right? You've got
not so phased.
Yes, you got the potato stones.
Yeah, and it's hard for somebody who's grown up in a place where the walls were so rectilinear,
right,
to accept that these rough walls are a good wall. But that's what looks best on our landscape.
I think so.
Yeah.
It takes a little chiseling. All you need is a mallet and some chiseling, and that's generally what I do. But yeah, it's a lot of work. And now the Croton Reservoir is the largest dry stone wall in the world.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's one of the wonders of the world, right? I think
is it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it is for being. Don't quote me on that. Better check that one out. But yes, that's amazing. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in a while.
And that was mostly built by Italian immigrants.
The Irish and the Italian, right? So it was first the Irish and then the Italians. And a lot of those contracts for building the walls are all still in existence.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so you can see the specifications for... Well, one thing that's interesting, besides the dam itself, at the time that the reservoir system was created, this was still agricultural. These lands were still agricultural.
Right. Okay.
So people worried about the cows getting in and polluting the reservoir.
Okay.
So all that long stretch of walls all along the outside was built to protect the reservoirs from the cows.
Gotcha.
And then within 10 years, there were no more
more
cows. But it's a beautiful wall.
Yeah.
And those walls are all specced out. And there were railroads, narrow-gauged railroads that were built to bring the stone in to build these walls.
It's like the reverse of a mine. The mine you're extracting stuff, and there you're bringing the stone in.
Bringing the stone from the blasting of the dams to the area around to fence off the reservoir, building this beautiful wall that's no longer necessary in a blink of an eye, in the time it took to build the wall. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like they paint a bridge and you get to the end of the bridge and you need to repaint it, and by the time they finish it, it's like, not too many cows here anymore. But at least it's a beautiful monument.
Right. Yeah, beautiful.
And artistry, and particularly for Italian Americans, and my father and me building the stone wall is like, that's your heritage, that artistry there. So maybe there's still something there, but yeah.
Oh, is that part of your
yes,
background?
I've been telling you,
yes. And was masonry or stone?
No, not at all. No, although my dad likes to say that we're related distantly to Michelangelo. So we have family that was originally from Florence. So I forget the lineage. He would know better. But
that's a good one to pull out.
Yeah, yes, possibly. There weren't that many people in Florence a few hundred years ago. So it's possible.
Right.
I think his last name, which I'm forgetting, we shared his same last name. I think he was a Simone. I forget. Anyway. But
okay.
Yes. But it's as artistic as I get is building a stone wall. And let's see, New Crow, the largest stone. And then the last thing, what we did do is we did these little rock walls in my parents' house growing up. And we would go rock hunting. Mm-hmm. And I've got to look this up. Stealing Stone Walls of Westchester was an article that had appeared in the New York Times.
Were you one of those people?
I mean, not really. We went around to the reservoir and the woods there and pulled out. But we weren't taking it
stones
from people's house. I mean, they were tiny. I mean, we're talking stone walls the size of a book or even smaller. So it's tiny ones. Not the big stones, but it's a thing.
Are you sure you're wanting to confess this?
I think there's a statute of limitations on 25 years.
Well, people are pretty attached to these walls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know it, and they're hard to come by. They are, and that's what makes it so expensive. It's just getting the stone, and I guess it's largely coming from quarries in Vermont, southern Maine. Well, I shouldn't say southern Maine, but I was in Stonington, Maine this past summer, and they've got, the amazing, slabs of granite, and just a lot of the homes have just
beautiful foundation stones,
and just amazing, and you're like, whoa! I mean, of course, because it's very easy to ship, but taking that stuff to where were the buildings? Many of the buildings in New York City. Where was that? Was that Vermont? Am I correct in saying that?
I know that I know Maine because I've been up there, but I'm sure that they came from quarries in Vermont as well. But
mostly Maine. Yeah, Bar Harbor is just famous for its stone walls, and there's a really nice, and I'm forgetting the real name of it now, and this is probably what the neighbors want. Shoreline Drive, I think, is what it was called years ago, and it's right on the ocean there, and it has the amazing stone walls for the entire stretch. It's probably 10 or 15 miles. We were there this summer looking for a beach, which is part of Acadia National Park. We couldn't find it, and they changed the name of the road from Shoreline Drive or whatever it was to some kind of, generic sounding name. And I don't know this, but I think it was because they didn't want too many sightseers seeing a Shoreline Drive and say, oh, well, let's go check out Shoreline Drive. So we almost couldn't find the beach, but we did.
I hope you did.
And those are some very different stones because they're all, of course, rounded by, the oceans over history, millennium, So they're all rounded, oval shaped, very different from. But would those still have been stones that were deposited during the glaciers?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, those that could have been rounded. I mean, you have here some areas where you have big cobbles, right, like this, that would have been, well, it could have been from the time of the glaciers, but it would have been a fast-moving river that was going through the area that would have rounded those stones at the time. So it was water that was depositing, or that was the cause of that fast-moving water. And then you have the glaciers that, let's see. Yeah, I suppose the glaciers didn't round things as much as a river would round things. Right. Let's put it that way. I hadn't really thought about that before, but that's... Yeah.
Very different shapes.
Both come from that same period.
I see. Okay, and then over the 10,000 years, they've become shaped. Any other thoughts on stone walls? Anything I'm missing from your talks that you've given?
Well, let's see. I mean, there's so much. Well, we got into the flip-flopping of the reputation of stone walls, and we ended on the flop where they were in disrepute when the move west began and when people abandoned their lands, and then again their reputation became renewed when you had this period of affluence. So just connecting those two discussions that we had, right?
And it's great to see that stone walls are, now certainly in vogue, which is great to see.
Yeah, and what's discouraging for me to see is that there are good ways of making stone walls and there are bad ways of making them.
Right.
And you see so much poor wall going up, and you know how expensive this was for the property owner, and they don't really understand why it's not good. It looks fine to them, but what's happening these days is that walls are being made in two distinct faces. Right. With nothing really to tie them together.
Gotcha. Yes.
And they're a rubble wall, which I hope your listeners will be able to understand, are made at a strong angle or batter, so they're like this, and the rubble's in between. And when they collapse like this, and they
inward,
don't really
with gravity.
Right, but they don't really lose their they don't lose their wall sense because they've just gone from this to that. Right. Whereas these walls that are going up today are going up like this with hardly any
perpendicular,
angle. Yeah, they're
versus
perpendicular,
the more almost
and there's
trapezoidal.
really not anything tying them together.
Right.
And anything that affects, it could just be road traffic, or it could be frosties, is going to just send that
it's going to
wall
knock over,
and it happens in the next year. It can happen the next year that something happens.
Yeah.
A deer just knocking off the top can topple those walls. It's just the antithesis of how walls should be built.
Right.
And that's discouraging to see that going up. I mean,
and they're paying a pretty penny to have, not
to have
the best
this
work. Yeah.
And they're not understanding. I mean, if they did this with the wall, then they would solve a lot of that problem. But it would take more stone to do this with those walls.
And what I've tried to do is do stones that run horizontally through both sides of the stone wall as almost dead men, as they're called. I mean, those are traditionally stick into a retaining wall. But, through stones. And then I do have the rubble in there, which acts as almost like a locking mechanism and prevents them from shifting around too much. The worst work that I've seen is cinder blocks between the stones. And so you just almost a facade, and you've got the cinder blocks in the middle. And of course, what's going to happen with the cinder blocks? Water is going to get in, it's going to freeze, and it's going to burst the cinder block and knock the wall off.
Or the stone is just going to
topple
off, and you're left with a cinder block wall.
Pasted on.
Where have you seen that?
I can't. Locally, within 10 miles or so of here in southern.
Oh, you've seen people put up.
Yes, as they were putting. Yes. So, and I pay attention because most people don't, and you don't see it because it's hidden. As soon as you finish the wall. But they were putting cinder blocks in the middle.
Right.
Which is cinder blocks for any sort of foundation. For folks listening, if you have a cinder block basement, avoid it if you can.
Because the same thing will.
They're not well built. I mean, we have a fieldstone foundation, which of course rocks that come from probably our property, and you have to refill the mortar and repoint it. But those rocks aren't going anywhere. Never. They're not going anywhere for hundreds of years. But cinder blocks are best avoided if at all possible, particularly for a foundation. It's different for building, some sort of random wall, but I wouldn't recommend it for a foundation. But and when you see stone walls that have way too much visible cement, I almost feel like that's cheating in many respects.
Right.
It's like, got a 3-inch gap, we'll just throw a bunch of cement in there.
Well, that cement just can't last over time.
No, it doesn't.
Something gets in there. Yeah. And there's advice out here. There are books out now. People should just spend a little bit more time vetting their builder if they're going to put the time and money into having a wall built. Yeah,
and you know what? There's so many different examples. Take a photo, and that's it.
Take a photo.
Get a sense of what you want, and that way you'll make sure that it's not too ornamental or not too old style looking. I mean, that's the great thing about it. There's so many different things that you could do, and archways, which is just fascinating as well. Right. So I'm building steps. That's about as difficult as I'm going to get, and just finding the right stones. And that part I'm going to cement. Because I'm just afraid of something shifting and somebody losing their footing. But everything else, I have tried to remain pure, no cement, and all the stones from my own property. So it's not going to look, as perfect as other places. But
it's going to look as sort of indigenous to your property.
And the price is right. Just got to have a really good wheelbarrow. So we're going to have one of those metal wheelbarrows. So. That I learned after destroying a wheelbarrow or two.
Oh, that was not metal.
It's got to be the metal one, the Jackson wheelbarrow. You'll see it. That's the blue wheelbarrow. And the most important thing is the rock bar, the point. I think it's called a pointing bar. And when I bought one at the hardware store, the woman referred to it as something out of Game of Thrones. You've got this 8-foot long, basically thick piece of steel, but.
And then you can move almost
anything. That's the 6 simple machines, a lever, and so I've got 2 now. So So.
Oh, your boys are going to grow up.
Oh boy, yes. And before we turn away, anybody doing stone walls, please, gloves, ear protection, steel-toed boots, please.
Oh, right. It can happen so quickly.
Yeah, a splinter in the eye, you're okay.
My goodness.
A shard of rock, and you don't want to drop any stones on your feet. So, leather palm gloves I recommend as opposed to the gardening gloves.
Yeah.
The leather palm gloves, you get your finger pinched between stones. Can just slide it right out, and so the glove will remain in the wall, but at least your hand is free. So I've learned that lesson a few times. So yes, the leather palm, loose fitting leather palm gloves, you're good to go, and they're $10 at the hardware store. So.
Right. Good.
Lots of tools. So it's always great to collect more and more tools.
And so you use that as your winter activity then?
Not so much this winter because it's just been, it gets cold. I mean, I've had the rocks break in half. I think in the wintertime, it's actually the colder weather. It's not the best time to be, because they'll break. And then the ground is frozen, so trying to move things around. So it's been... I think next week, it's March now, and I think starting next week, I was hoping to do that this winter, but I end up doing more inside stuff. So, but it's such it's like a nice 3-dimensional puzzle, and it keeps me busy and burns some energy, and so it's been really great.
Yeah, a lot of people prefer that you have something at the end. If you go out riding a bike, you have nothing at
That's
the
true.
end to
Yes,
show
yeah.
it,
I mean,
right?
it is. There's a great satisfaction. I mean, as much as you might curse your way through it, there's a nice satisfaction in whatever we do when we can say whether you've written a book or built a stone wall. I mean, it is a living thing to be able to say, wow, I did this, and there's that satisfaction. Yeah. Not that I wouldn't just want a brand new house where I could walk in and everything would be perfect. So maybe one day I'll have that, but there's a nice satisfaction in saying, I did that, I did this. So, And I wanted to talk about your most recent book about omega-3s and omega-6s, and I was reading the blog post you had put recently, and you'd run across a musher and sled dogs, and you were asking how the dogs were fed. And so sometimes with scientific studies we get mixed messages, and one of those has been, for me, I mean, literally within the last couple of weeks, canola oil.
Yes.
And so it's gotten a bad rap, and then I'm reading from you. You feel the exact opposite.
I feel absolutely.
So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Canola, or it's called rapeseed oil. In Europe.
Okay.
And it's a very traditional oil.
Yeah.
And it just happens to have a great balance of omega-3s and omega-6s.
Right.
And it could be our savior. It could be getting us out of this pickle where we have too few omega-3s in our diet. And canola can fix that. Now, why it gets such a bad rap, I have a whole article on it. It's just somehow the name rapeseed was triggered things in people's heads, so that wasn't a good name. That's part of it, and then there was something else that they thought it was.
Reminds me of the Patagonian toothfish. You know what that we call? Chilean sea bass.
Yes,
it was once
that it needed to be renamed.
Yeah.
So it was renamed canola, and then what? Oh, I know what it was. Mustard gas. That's what people linked it to.
Really?
Mustard gas, because mustard is a form of it's a brassica, and so somehow it's got nothing to do with it, but it's been connected in people's heads to mustard gas and then to rape. Which neither one are legitimate connections or legitimate reasons for not using canola. And then there's also the idea that it's an industrialized oil, which any oil can be refined on a large scale, or can be treated and just cold pressed, as much rapeseed oil is in Europe.
Right.
When you go into a grocery store in Sweden or in Norway, you will see row upon row of rapeseed oil that is as we see virgin olive oil. So
I see.
you will
Okay.
see virgin rapeseed
Oh,
oil,
wow. Okay.
cold pressed rapeseed oil, non-GMO rapeseed oil,
Right.
all of those variations that we have here for olive oil.
Right.
But it's got a much higher content of omega-3s, and it's, in my mind, is the best fat for us to be using on a regular basis. That and grass-fed butter, which
grass-fed butter. Okay,
right,
wow.
Which is the butter from either from Ireland or from a farmer that is grass feeding, exclusively grass feeding their cows, which is hard to find in this country, but very easy to find.
Is that the Kerrygold?
Kerrygold.
All right,
yeah.
That I'll remember.
I should ask have you traveled in Ireland?
Because, I have, yes.
Yeah, because then those walls are incredible.
Oh,
to
yes,
see.
yeah,
right.
Yeah, they've got
but then you see the grass too. The grass is what impressed me. I thought, oh, this is the place that all our butter should come from. This grass is just everywhere. It's just beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful
they've got very nice, fine mist. And I lived in Scotland for a period, and it never rained like it does here. And that we get massive thunderstorms. We just get, downpours of rain. They don't get that sort of rain there.
They have a misty.
It rains often, but just in less quantities. And so you do have that fine mist that is often around, and that's just perfect for grass rather than it getting flooded. I don't
think of Scotland as having the same kind of grass as Ireland does, but maybe I haven't traveled that much.
That's a good question. I wonder, because Ireland is closer to the Atlantic Ocean, I wonder if that has something to do with it. Because it is the same latitude pretty much, but it is closer to the Atlantic Ocean, and that must have something to do with, picking up the evaporation from the ocean and then that becoming the mist. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I
don't know either. That's something to look at. But anyway, those are the fats I recommend, and all omega. The book, The Queen of Fats, that I wrote, and the Queen of Fats are the omega-3s. The king of fats are the omega-6s. We need more omega-6s in our diet than we do omega-3s, about twice as much.
Right.
But we have too many omega-6s in our diet.
Right, okay.
Because the American fast food sad diet is based on these seed oils that are easy, inexpensive to make, and that don't go rancid.
Right. So what are the oils to avoid? I mean, olive oil, of course, is good. Canola is good. What are the ones worth?
Sunflower, safflower.
Okay. Vegetable oil.
Soy. Vegetable oil is one of those oils.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So
all right.
What's called vegetable oil, look for things that do have canola oil in them, or that. Look for, if you're going to get a packaged good, look for those that have canola, that are made with canola oil.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we get enough omega-6s. I guess we don't need to touch too much. But omega-3s, I mean, what are the foods that are the highest? I mean, I read mackerel and sardines. And
it's that being one of the points is which ones have the highest amount. But we have to understand where the omega-3s come from. And this is the good part of the story, that all omega-3s originate in the green leaves of plants.
Okay.
They're the fats that enable plants to carry out photosynthesis, which requires some 75 different enzymes twisting and turning in the membrane. And it's those omega-3s in the chloroplasts of plant cells that enables that photosynthetic reaction to take place.
Right.
And then animals such as us will consume those omega-3s, and we'll turn them into even longer, more complex compounds.
Okay.
But the ones that we're eating from the green leaves, those are the essential fats. We can't make them ourselves. We have to acquire them in that way, and then we either acquire them by eating the greens or by eating animals that have eaten the greens.
Okay.
And animals. As I said, we eat them, we turn them into these longer compounds, and we put those compounds in all of our speediest tissues, our eyes, our brains, our muscles, our hearts.
Right.
We require that same level of flexibility, whether you want to call it that, or looseness that omega-3s impart to us. Well, the interesting thing is that those fats from the green leaves of plants compete with the fats from the seeds of plants for positions in our cell membranes.
Okay.
And the fats from the seeds of plants have a different effect on our cell membranes. They slow them down. They're a little bit stiffer.
Right.
They're not as flexible as the omega-3s. And so animals like us use these. We respond to these fats in very different ways, and we use them. We use our shifting diet as we go from the spring and the summer, when the fats of from the leaves of plants are more available. We speed up. We become more active. It's a time of reproduction and a speedier activity. And then when the fats of seeds are more available in the fall and in the winter, we use those as cues to hunker down for survival. And we put on weight with those omega-6 fats, and we store them in our tissues.
Right.
Whereas the fats from the seeds, we don't store as much. You don't find those in all of our belly fat and everything. It's those 6s that are in there.
Right.
So we have used this. This is a very powerful way that we use these changing fats to prepare for the future, for those times of activity and those times of hunkering down and survival. Now, with our industrialization of eating and our way of storing food, packaging, storing food, we have that high omega-6 diet all year round.
I see. Okay.
And we have to, as an individual, we don't want to be hunkering down and in that mode all year round. We really have to understand that the different nature of these 3s and 6s and make those choices.
So what are the foods you recommend for folks getting omega? I mean, I eat sardines, mackerel, but most people don't ever and won't even touch it. It's a great way to kind of eat lunch on your own, is to open up a can of sardines, which if folks do, I mean, it obviously is very healthy for you. It's great for the planet because there are lower on the food chain fish.
Yeah, right.
I do sardines on toast.
With a lot of parsley or something.
I do cilantro, salsa verde, which I make myself, but you can buy it anywhere in the Mexican specialty section, and some capers.
Yeah, and
it's great. It's really great. It's really great.
Delicious.
It's really great.
I haven't tried it with cilantro. I've tried it with parsley, but that
I'm a cilantro fan.
Me too.
Anything that requires parsley, I'm like, can we just put cilantro? I mean, it doesn't go as well with maybe Italian food, but parsley's the boring cousin of cilantro as far as I'm concerned. So I love it in everything. So
that's a great source. But here's the trick: it's to have a source of omega-3s and not too many omega-6s at every meal. Okay. And then your body's just going to do the rest. Your enzymes are going to do the rest. You don't have to worry about it, but just worry about that you have that source of omega-3s.
Right.
So that can be fish is a great source of omega-3s.
Salmon in particular.
Salmon is great. I mean, but it's not one fish or over another. Right. All fish, with the exception of maybe catfish and tilapia.
Right.
But pretty much all fish have more omega-3s in them than terrestrial animals because they have to live under pressure in those dark, cold environments. So they require more flexibility in their membranes.
Right.
So all fish are a great source of those omega-3s for terrestrial animals like we are. Right. But we don't have to be talking about which fish has more than another.
That's good to know.
Because you don't store these. You put them into your membranes. There's no you don't really store these fats in your bodies. You use them or you excrete them.
Right.
So the point isn't to have the most omega-3s. It's to have the omega-3s that you need for your body in your diet, right? Not to have, to be eating the most that you could possibly do. So it's having readily available to the enzymes that digest our food and make them available to our tissues, a source of omega-3s and not too many 6s. And the reason why you have to have that not too many 6s is that those two fats will compete with each other for both for enzymes and for positions in our cell membranes.
Could you talk about what foods are high in the 6s?
In the 6s, well, of course, most seeds, with the exception of flaxseed, which has a very good ratio of 3s and 6s, and that's another great seed that helps us to balance out this. Walnuts also have a pretty good ratio of 3s and 6s. But most other seeds are really high in those 6s, and that's because they're fats that can be stored over a long period of time, so they don't go rancid. And so they're high in the 6s. They overwhelm the 3s. And when we make then vegetable oils out of pressing those seeds, like the safflower and the sunflowers, and what other oils do we make out of? Well, there are a bunch of them, but safflower, sunflower, soy are really the most common ones that we use. When you make the vegetable oil out of pressing them, those oils are also going to be very much higher in 6s than 3s. And, our bodies have an actual preference for the omega-3s, so our enzymes will actually seize upon them if they see them, and if you don't have too many 6s at that same meal that's going to confuse them. They can maintain their preference with about a 1-3, 1-4 ratio, but you get to this 1-25 ratio that many of us consume on a daily basis. And our tissues are just going to be full of omega-6s, not those omega-3s that we require for optimal behavior, for optimal vision, for optimal thinking, for optimal, heart rate, everything that is thrown off by not having that good balance.
And so grass-fed, you talked about the grass-fed butter. Grass-fed beef, it's really good.
It's really good. There's a really good reason why it's really good.
Yeah, I had always thought it was, it's better for but it's actually better. It's good.
It's better for us as well as probably the planet, that those grass-fed animals aren't burping up as much methane as these corn-fed animals are. But yes, grass-fed beef is a completely different piece of beef than your industrial beef. Yeah.
Wow. And then the same goes then for eggs as well?
Eggs. Yes. Well, eggs are my favorite thing, because when chickens were free to forage for themselves and to get their own insects and their own greens, their eggs were as rich in omega-3s as a piece of salmon.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, okay. And everybody eats eggs. I mean, some people
eggs.
like fish and some don't, but everybody pretty much
Everybody eats eggs. Yeah. That's a fantastic way for you to get your omega-3s from omega-3 eggs, which you can find sometimes. Stores go in and out of having them, but you can definitely go to your store and say,
are these enriched eggs, or are they?
No, it's just the chickens are fed a healthy diet,
right? And they're not caged. And so if
it's they can be. You could feed a caged egg a high omega-3 diet, but most people aren't doing that. So this is associated with
When folks are looking for these eggs at the grocery store, will it say omega-3s on them, or will it say, I don't know, is there such a thing as grass-fed chickens? What
they would say pasture-raised.
Pasture-raised.
But that's not good enough for being a really healthy omega-3 egg, unless unless you know your farmer and you know that chicken is just being pasture raised. If they're feeding this chicken and he has 10 feet of ground that he can move around in, and they're feeding him conventional feed, it's not going to produce a very high omega-3 egg.
Gotcha. Okay.
Anyway, that's a fine point. But most cartons will brag about the fact
I
that
see. Okay, if they have it, they're going to mention it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and you want something with 250 or more milligrams of omega-3s per egg.
Okay.
You don't want to be, I'm an omega-3 egg and I've got 100 milligrams of omega-3s. That's pretty much what a conventional chicken would have. So you want to be looking
250 milligrams
to 300.
to 300
I just bought some
omega-3.
that were 325.
Wow.
That's a good amount. That's what eggs used to be. That's
when they were
when the chickens were wandering on their own, foraging for themselves.
Well, they weren't wandering too far because there were really nice stone walls preventing them from going.
That's good.
Then how about milk?
Back.
How about milk? Because I buy milk for my children. I do half and half for my coffee. It's the only milk I drink. But of course, they drink whole milk, and there are omega-3 enriched milk. Would you recommend
the enriched
those?
ones, or there's the grass-fed?
I
milk.
see. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you're buying grass-fed milk, it should already have the omega-3s that you want, and so really the grass-fed is what you want to look for.
You want to look for.
Okay,
and you can be assuming that that's not going to be your child's biggest source of omega-3s because they're also feeding that cow not just grass but something else. Depending on what else they're feeding that cow, it can have a better or worse ratio. But it's definitely better than conventional milk.
So can hurt, in other words. It's not the solve, but it can hurt.
Yeah, it can't hurt. And just look for the brand that you find that is fresh and good tasting.
Yeah, I mean, that's so key with everything. Yeah, okay, so grass-fed butter, grass-fed beef.
The grass-fed butter is a no-brainer, and it tastes so different to me.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. You should, just for an experiment with your family, you should get
the
two. And
the thing with butter is
side by side.
You're always spreading it on something, so it's hard to taste the butter. But I will taste the butter.
Have a taste
That's interesting.
Test.
Okay.
Yeah, the color and the taste.
Right.
Just to compare them side by side.
And so, you have the cookie business, Susie's Smart Cookies, which I noticed that flax seeds was an important component of a lot. Because I asked my wife, we do have flax seeds and chia seeds at home, and I tasted both of them. You can't eat them you can, but you wouldn't want to just, have a tablespoon of flaxseed like you could for a sunflower seed, for instance. But they're great. She puts them in granola. You don't even know that they're there. And so your cookies, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your business, how you launched it.
Right.
And
so after I wrote The Queen of Fats, I thought, there must be a way to turn this knowledge into something more tangible. And I'd always been a baker at home, and I had some, favorite chocolate chip. I had a favorite chocolate chip cookie recipe, and I started with that one.
Okay.
It was very easy to replace some of the flour with ground flaxseed.
Ground flaxseed.
Yeah, that's what I use.
Yeah, that's the key
because
thing.
that's more accessible to our enzymes in our digestive system.
Right.
And so I did that, and it turned out it tasted, to my taste, it tasted even better. Because it's much more whole grains and much more fiber in them. I thought they were delicious. And then I went from that. A friend said, well, gosh, I'd really love to have something I could eat for breakfast with the omega-3s. And so I created the breakfast cookie.
Okay.
And that has 2 grams of omega-3s, so it's a really substantial amount.
Right.
It's vegetarian omega-3s. It's not what you're going to find in fish or eggs.
Okay.
But your body, because it has that really healthy ratio of 3s to 6s, your body is going to be able to convert those omega-3s into those long-chain omega-3s that are in our eyes and brains. And we have done studies and shown that actually is the case. If people are eating this ratio, their bodies are very good at making those conversions, and you need much less fish than if you are eating.
It's probably a lot easier to sell cookies than fish. I mean, a breakfast cookie, it just sounds too perfect.
It's so much easier to sell a cookie than fish, but also so much easier to sell a cookie than a book.
Yes.
So this is
right.
And for some reason, it's just so immediately good for people. I find it very satisfying to sell my cookies.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great. And so, how did you get the business off the? I mean, it's one thing to build, make cookies in your kitchen, and then the next to. I don't see any industrial size cookies, so I presume they're not made here.
From the beginning, I never wanted to do this baking at home. I knew I would burn out immediately if I did that.
Yeah.
So I got help from the Cornell.
Oh, wow.
They have a food entrepreneurship lab or a division that they are willing to give a New York person who's interested in starting a food business.
Wow.
They gave me enormous amounts of help and really got me off the ground.
That's great.
From there I moved to better and better co-packers, as they call bakers that do your baking for you.
Wow.
I've got a lovely group up in New Hampshire now that does the baking. And yes, there's always still, it's completely different from me coming from a background of writing to be in but sorry about that.
No worries.
You're going to edit it out.
No,
anyway.
well, you know what? It makes it seem more authentic because I got to, you can just be sequestered in some studio. But, now it's like, this is actually recorded on location in a real home.
Right. And it's some spam call. Yes, a spam call that I
never. So you're now in Whole Foods. I was looking at the places.
They're Whole Foods. They used to be in a lot of airports, but that business just went kerplunk with COVID.
Sure.
And I'm on QVC. I sell the things on QVC.
Are you on QVC? Wow.
QVC.
Okay. Wow.
Right. And where else is good? And then they're online, and they sell on Amazon and all the usual places.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I've had customers from the very get-go that are still ordering them.
That's terrific. I mean, again, it's just, I had once thought about trying to, I love pumpkin seeds, for instance, and I once thought about trying to get that going as a business. And there was a terrific book, Cooking Up a Business, if anybody's interested in making, food stuff and the co-packing arrangements and all that. But it's a whole lot easier to sell cookies, I'd imagine, than it is for, seeds that most people don't eat. So, and particularly when you can make it a healthy cookie, that's a winning business model right there, if I've ever heard of one.
Right. It's some people say, why do you call it a cookie? Is it too sweet for that? And, so I still have a lot of pushback on that. But it is. It's just sweet enough to be considered a treat.
Okay.
But it's, and just sweet enough for kids, too. Not too sweet for adults.
Right.
And we've had people use them for weight loss for all kinds of reasons.
And now, when people are cooking at home, in terms of flaxseed, what's the ratio that you recommend? I mean, let's say a recipe says a cup of flour. How much?
A cup of flour. So I would start by replacing 1/5 of that with flaxseed meal, and then work to 1/4. And that's all.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all
really
you need to do. And then you've added a really healthy amount of omega-3s, especially if you replace maybe some of the butter. Well, use the grass-fed butter.
Using grass-fed butter.
Use the high omega-3 eggs, and you've got yourself
you get this
omega-3
omega-3 bomb right
Yes, you've got yourself a really good baked good.
And now the flour, is that commercially available? Do you have to ground it yourself? Where can one find flaxseed flour?
No, the flaxseed meal is commercial.
The meal.
Yeah, the meal is, Ben's, Bob's Red Mill has it. Other places do too, but Bob's Red Mill has it.
Okay.
And when I was beginning all of this, it wasn't as available, but now it is. And
that's great.
Just have it in your kitchen and use it.
And that's important for folks to recognize, not the flax seeds themselves, the meal, the ground up flax seeds.
And you can add a couple of tablespoons to any pancake
that's true.
that you're making, or pretty much anything. When I make French toast, I'll add some to that batter before I make that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We had tried, I mean, it's similar to almond meal in that my wife would make cookies, particularly when I'd go hiking, which were made with almond flour as opposed to, regular flour. But I guess, is there a walnut flour? Because almonds aren't as healthy, I guess, as walnuts are or flax are. Is there a walnut flour?
Yeah, I use, you can grind up walnuts yourself and make a walnut butter for that. You can do that. Walnuts are expensive. So
they are expensive, that's
one
true.
Of the reasons. Yeah. And is there a commercially available walnut meal? I haven't seen it.
Okay.
But you can do it on your own. It's delicious, but it's just, you want to be using it. It's such an expensive ingredient.
Right. Well, that's true. And walnuts are pretty tasty. So,
I love them, and I make a candied walnut that I have available all winter, for snacking and stuff. That and I add a little flax to it, and I add a little canola. So it's really another high omega-3 snack. There's so many ways of doing this.
And so how long has the cookie business been going for?
Since maybe 2010.
Oh, wow. So we're talking 10 years. Okay.
Yeah, it's been a while. I have my, Michelle is out there in the garage. She's been on COVID. She's been working from home, but she's just starting to come back now. And
great.
Yeah, she does most of the day-to-day to it.
Okay.
And
how was it getting your first placement in, a business like Whole Foods, or did you start smaller at, local?
Oh, yeah, I started at local, and I drove them around at one time. Yeah, I drive around and supply, and now have distributors that do
great.
all of that.
Yeah, no, that's great.
But it was good for me, knowing nothing about business, to actually go and to, collect and all of those aspects of having a business were interesting. And then, for years now, distributors have done it.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, is it still amazing? I mean, you said it was carried in all, still is, I assume, in airports, and, of course, people are traveling this, but walking by and seeing.
Oh, yeah, it was so fun.
You ever watch anybody buy, looking to buy those cookies?
I'd show off to my grandsons if we were traveling together.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so good.
My cookie. Sometimes one has just gotten old enough. He's 8.
Right.
He's saying, "Well, how do you make those?" Because he does see. He's like saying, "Wait a second." Now I know it's, you can't just imagine those. How are those made? Yeah.
So any advice to folks that want to get into, making it a business, who, I don't know, make their own, say, for instance, pasta sauce or salsa?
Right. Well, if you're in New York State, you can contact the Cornell Institute of Food.
That's their agriculture. I mean, I'm sure any state in the United States does have the agriculture. It's at the agricultural extension, right, and has a similar arrangement in most states.
Maybe Connecticut has it too. But, yeah, it's yeah, and then you get all the information on all the FDA laws and all the requirements, and you have to, when you first start, you have not a clue as to what the issues might be. So they're very helpful with something like that, and and then just know that it's going to take a lot of time and price it well, so you never have to. So it's always going to be profitable. If you don't build in the margins for distributors and everything right at the get-go, then you
run into trouble later trying to raise prices. I mean, in some respects, if it is priced right, just high enough. I mean, there's often, you come across something and you're like, wow, that's so cheap. And then you think there's that psychology, and you're like, I don't know if that's so good. But, particularly with a healthy product, I almost feel like if it's a little bit more expensive, people are like, oh, that must be really good for you. I mean,
Yeah, well, I don't know if you can fine-tune it that much, because, of course, the manufacturer can't dictate what the price is going to be in the store. So you can't.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sitting down with me.
And enjoyed it.
I'm going to go out and buy some Susie's Smart Cookies.
I'll give you some.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got some in the freezer.
Oh, good. And put more flax meal and things, and eat grass-fed beef and omega-3 eggs. And I mean, my wife, when she was pregnant with both our sons, we had, she took a supplement, but we had salmon every week.
Yes.
For the duration. I mean, she kind of got a little sick of it, but I mean, it is so good, and I guess that brain development, the omega-3s is part of that.
And the baby is gonna pull those omega-3s out of the mother, so she really has to have that source. Otherwise, she's gonna wind up depleted at the end of the pregnancy.
You, I think it was on your website. There was this experiment with the rats, and the one rat that had the omega-3 was able to find the platform in the water tank, and the other one just kind of was completely clueless. So it's
it's really, really important.
Yeah.
It's, we can't talk our way around it. It's very fundamental to our, good living.
Excellent. All right. Well, I look forward to eating better butter and having an excuse to do it.
Now you have a right.
Well, thank you, Susan.
Okay. Thank you.